Hey guys, yeah, it's story time again. And it's such a beautiful day, I thought I'd do it outside. But anyways, I was trying to think of what I could talk about, and the last one was about when I was a kid and started trapping. So I thought I'd just carry on there and just talk a little bit about. I had a friend in school who thought he wanted to become a trapper too. His name was Dave Martin from Aurelia. So he started coming out with me every once in a while, and the one fall. This was the fall I turned when I was 16, because it was the last year I was in school, of course. Dave and another buddy, Paul Valley, would, they'd come out on the line with me and fart around a little bit in open water. And that's where, I picked up my Dave Martin's actually the guy that gave me my first nickname, the only nickname I ever had, and it only lasted the year, that winter, because once I was out of school and in the spring I quit just with a couple months left in the school year and left. But I was they weren't used to being in the bush, so we were crossing beaver dams in the fall, and so they were all going across, trying not to fall in the water, whatever, and I would just, being used to it, I just motored right across like nothing. And Dave Martin said there one day, he goes, "Holy crap, look at that bush rabbit go." And so therefore the rest of the year, that's what my nickname was at school, was Bush Rabbit. And but I just wanted to, a couple things like with Dave. We went out one day. My parents had my truck because they didn't have a vehicle, and so Dave's parents drove us out and dropped us off. We were about 20 miles north of Aurelia, and there was up on. For those guys down there, they know that area, and the Severn River is a snow belt now, so you can have the weather coming off of Georgian Bay, and it rolls down through along the Severn River there, and you can have 2 feet of snow on one side of the river, and then in Aurelia 20 miles away you get nothing. But anyways, we got up there and there was snow. It had literally, it was a lot like that walk I talked about going in with Bill into my trap line up at Hiawatha, snow over your knees. But the good thing here was it was only about a 5-mile circle that we had to do. So we got underway and we're going and going. And we got into the back end of it, and it had taken a long time, to slug through that stuff. And we got into the very back end, and we were walking out onto a pond where I had some beaver traps set, and I told Dave, I said, do not get off my trail. This is not the best of ice at the best of times. But he took a couple steps off to the side and bang, went through the ice, up to his knee on the one leg, and by the time we got him out, his boot had filled up with water. And I said, okay, well, come on, we'll get back to shore, we'll start a fire and get your boot all wrung out and dried off. And he was adamant that no, it was taking so long for us to slog our way through there that he said, no, we got to get going. We're going to be late as it is, and my mom's going to worry when she comes to pick us up because we're not there. So I said, okay, well, you just let me know if your foot gets too cold. He said, yeah. But anyway, so we started started walking, and we got, about a mile further down, and we got to where I had my little cabin built. And, I told him, well, come on, we'll get a fire going here and we can get your foot dried out. And he was, no, we have to get back. And, so, well, we kept on going and slowly trudged our way through there. And, sure enough, we get about 2 miles from the highway, and we reached a point where the main Skidoo trail came through that area in the wintertime. And we got to a spot where the Skidooers had broke the trail, but it was just so hard, so tough braking for them that's as far as they'd gotten, and they built a fire on the pond, and then just turned around and went back. And we got there, and there were still some coals, so I scrounged up a little bit of wood on the side and got the fire going. And I said, well, come on, let's, because I'll give it to him, he never complained once about the cold or anything like that. So I had nothing to base, I had nothing to force him to do. But sure enough, he said, no, we got to get going. And he was right. I mean, it was dark already, and his mom was going to be waiting for us at dark, and we still had a couple miles to go. But anyway, so we kept going, and it ended up, he his boot was frozen solid. We got back to town, and I found out the next day, that it was seriously froze solid. It took a couple hours at the hospital to thaw the boot out to get it off his foot, and his foot was black and like seriously frozen, and he lost several toenails, I believe. I don't think he lost any toes. It's hard to remember that far back when it doesn't actually happen to you, but I know he lost some toenails. And I only mention it just so everybody knows, if you get wet, it's much better to have somebody worrying about you, and you don't end up freezing your foot, or worse, because he easily could have lost some toes. But like I said, it's easier to let somebody worry for a little while and you make it out than to have that kind of damage done. But just tough guy, boy, to not utter one word of complaint that whole way out there, where to have his whole foot frozen, because I've had my feet get pretty cold before, and it's just not fun. And I can same sort of deal. I remember on my second trap line, Nimigus Lake. Okay, I was with my first wife. We just, it was our first year together, and so I'd taken a full-time job. I was working full-time at the mill in White River, and I'd taken holidays to go trapping in the fall. I was in there for 3 weeks. I'd come out, and then I was just running in every weekend. I'd get off work Friday afternoon and run into the trap line and come out Sunday night. Well, this one weekend, we hit a cold snap where it got down. It was horrendously cold, and it was for 2 weeks, just non-stop. Every night, 45, 50 below Fahrenheit. Never warming up to warmer than 30 below in the daytime. So my wife talked me into not going the one weekend, because she didn't feel it was safe. It was too cold. And so I didn't. And then, the next weekend, the weather hadn't broke. And I was like, well, I got to get in there. I've got, lynx traps set. I don't like leaving foot traps. I don't like leaving them 1 week. This was before we had check limits. You had to check your foot traps every 48 hours, and I think it's now 24. in Ontario. That was before they came up with the offset jawed traps and the soft grips. But you know, I told her I can't leave those traps that long. I told her I'll just run in Saturday morning and check them traps and come back Sunday. I wouldn't go Friday. I'd just spend the one night in there. Well, so of course what happens that night, that Friday night, it turns even colder than it had been, and it was, you know, down into the, you know, 55, 58 degrees below zero. And just bitterly, horrendously cold. But, you know, nice thing in Ontario, you get that kind of temperature. Once it hits 40 below, you never, ever see any wind. Not like here, you know, it can be 40 below and you can have a 30-mile-an-hour wind blowing. It's just treacherously dangerous out here with the weather. But there, and you know, 40 below is nothing when you've got no wind. You know, walking around, and this is a little sidebar, anyways. You know, at 40 below, you walk around because you don't want to sweat up. And, you know, I would carry my mitts with me. I'd have, you know, bare hands, and I'd have, most of the time, I'd have my hat off my head, you know, and then once in a while, you know, your ears would get cold, so you put it back on to warm up your ears. But anyways, you know, at 55 below, you start getting into some pretty dangerous temperatures. So anyways, it was so cold that when my wife and, you know, I didn't want to leave my vehicle on the side of the road because I just knew it wouldn't start. There was just no way. So I got my wife and her dad to drive me out there, drop me off, and then bring the truck back and then come pick me up Sunday night. And, you know, so no problem. But it was literally so cold that the battery started freezing up on the way up there, and we had to keep stopping and letting it, you know, warm up with the engine, just, you know, because at 55 below, when you're traveling 60 miles an hour, you know, you're probably, I wouldn't know what the wind chill would be at that, but you're probably looking at 80 below anyways, blowing in through that front of the vehicle onto your battery. So every once in a while we'd just stop and let it, the engine warm up the battery a little bit. But no matter, I got off at the snowmobile where I had my snowmobile parked. It stayed there all winter, by the way, and you know, got into my trap line. This was a 340 Enticer, a Yamaha. Not my favorite snow machine I ever had. Horrible for freezing up in powder snow until I built a little heater for the carb. And I'll give you another little sidebar here. I built a little, on those things, your fan exhaust came out the top and blew out in front of the windshield or wherever. I built a little metal tin thing that went over the exhaust of the fan and routed the air down over top of the carb. And you know, I traveled like that for 2 years with that thing, and then I seen them come out on the market, and they were selling them in all the Yamaha stores, or actually all, you know, any kind of store. And anyways, so sidebar, I get into my cabin, and it is horrendously cold. I have in my cabin, there's it's like here, my bed, 4 feet away is the wood stove, and in between is my water pail. And overnight, it was so cold in that cabin with the wood stove going that my water pail froze solid while I was sleeping. Now, I got up in the morning and it was 68 below on my thermometer on the porch of the cabin. And, you know, I wasn't going to go anywhere at 68 below, so I kind of held on. But at some point I had to go because I had to run another miles over to the Nimigus, through the KB River, and check that run of lynx traps and marten traps over there. And on the other side of the KB River, I didn't have any marten traps, so I didn't have to go past there. I just wanted to get those lynx traps checked in case there was something in the traps. But you know, I probably should have known better, because at 50 below there isn't a lot of fur moving around. And but I had to cross Nimigus Lake and then do a 2-mile trail up through the bush to Mountain Lake. Now Mountain Lake, as the name would warrant, there's a huge hill on the south side of the lake, and on the other north side is kind of shallow, but it's not a wide lake, maybe a 1/4 mile wide and mile long. But it's a very shallow lake, and so there's a lot of spring holes. You know, guys that travel up there lots, so you know, you get a shallow, muddy lake, and there's always going to be a lot of spring holes in the ice and slush. Now, there had been quite a bit of snow falling since last time I was there, and I got onto Mountain Lake, and I got 200 yards, 300 yards out into the lake, and I hit slush. And you know, my snow machine had been kind of acting up, you know, starting to cough a little bit, but I got out onto the lake, and even right across my marked trail, the slush had come up, because there was maybe, you know, 18 inches of snow on the lake. And it looked, I couldn't even, you know, a lot of times you can see where there's slush because the snow caves in somewhat. But I don't know what it was, if I was hiding behind the windshield to keep the wind out of my face or what, but I never noticed the slush, and I drove right into the middle of it, and I got stuck, as you always do if you're, you know, getting into that kind of slush. But there was a good 12, 14 inches of slush on top of the ice, and then, you know, 6 inches of snow on top of that. At 68 below, it's hard to imagine that there can be water under the snow just 6 inches down, but that snow is an awesome insulator, and it was there. So, you know, bang, I got about 200 feet out into that slush, and it just died there. Well, just stopped dead. So, you know, this was before I learned enough to carry a shovel with me, and so I got that machine turned around now, and you know, tried to go back, because that's the main thing you do, is you get your machine turned around and try and go back on the same trail that you went in on. I'd gun it, and it would go, and the motor would just about die. It did. I thought, oh, you know, I figured it's so clogged up with slush that it's just not got the power to go. So I literally picked up the front of that machine and leaned back and dropped it, you know, 6 inches at a time for the next 6 hours. And finally, I got that thing, you know, the 100 yards or whatever it was out of that slush, and got her cleaned out and got it going across the lake. And I was like, oh, right on, you know. It was just, it didn't want to go fast, but I could get it moving. But I got to the end of the lake, and I hit the hill, and it just would not move. It would sit there, I'd give it gas, and it would go bleh. And I was like, oh man. And now it's already at the level where it's starting to get dark, and to the point where I knew my wife and her dad would be waiting already at the highway for me. And I was like, oh boy. So I started walking. I was 3 miles past my cabin, and well, you can only imagine that playing around in that slush that whole day, my boots were full of water. It was, you know, quite wet. And I got to Nimigus Lake, and at that point I was 1.5 miles from my cabin, or I was 11 miles from the highway. And I started walking towards the highway, but I got about another mile only, and then I could feel the ice in my boots. You know, it was slowly freezing from the outside and freezing and freezing, and I could feel the ice squishing my toes together. My feet weren't cold. Well, I shouldn't say they weren't cold. They weren't frozen. They were, you know, I could feel the cold pretty good. But, you know, and then I made the decision, I was going to turn around and go back to the cabin, spend the night. You know, they were going to obviously worry about me. And, but it was still, you know, it was in that 55, 60 below range already when I got to the cabin. Got the fire going good again. No problems. I spent the night. The next morning, I started walking out. I got about halfway out, and sure enough, I heard snowmobiles coming. Now, the weather had broken overnight. It was down to, maybe minus 20. It had, turned into some nice weather. So I was walking out, no problem. And sure enough, here comes Bill Clark. You guys know who he is. He's on several of my ones that I've mentioned, and another buddy, Don Wilson, which was Bill's trapping partner. They come in with their snowmobiles and rescued me, so to speak, but I was halfway out already anyways, walking with the snowshoes. But it was, my wife had gotten back to town, and she was worried, as, well, you would expect, and you can't blame her. Now, she had tried to get Bill and Dawn to go the night before in and get me, but, they told her, after dark at 60 below, they weren't going nowhere. They convinced her that I would be at the cabin probably, and that I just had snowmobile troubles and blah, blah, blah. And they were right. But anywho, what ended up happening with the snow machine was the 340 Enticer was, oil injection. And me being back then too cheap or too stupid, one or the other, to put quality oil in there, I didn't have any injection oil with me one time, and I put in regular mixing oil into the injector reservoir. And that oil had gotten, at 68 below, had gotten so thick it couldn't pump through the oil pump, and ended up burning out all the rings out of that snow machine. That's why it would run, but as soon as I gave it any throttle, it would just, the pressure would push out through the rings and just baff out the machine. And so that was a lesson I learned there. Quality oil. If it tells you to put injection oil in a machine, that's what your best bet is, to put the proper oil in there, and not be cheaper. Make sure you got it on hand, because I think what had happened, I just, because I had 3 snow machines and 2 of them were mixing oil, and then the one was the injector. But that was just, 68 below, just scary cold stuff if you're stuck out in the bush. Same trap line. This was, nothing dangerous. This was just a funny coincidence, or a happening, so I guess you'd call it. I was in my cabin, and I went to sleep. It was 44 below Fahrenheit when I went to sleep. I woke up in the morning, and it was 38 above zero when I got up in the morning. Now that's a 82 degree change in 8 hours. I looked outside, it was beautiful blue sky, just, the sun coming up, just beautiful morning. And, and you get that kind of weather change or temperature change, and something's about to happen, and it's generally not anything good. So I wasn't supposed to come out for 2 days. But I said, well, you know, something's seriously going to go goofy here, because I had my vehicle parked on the side of the road then. And, you know, I jumped on the Skidoo, I packed up, headed out. You know, it's 13 miles, you know, an hour, 45-minute hour drive to get out of there. By the time I got a mile from the highway, there was a cloud bank that I could see coming from the west, just moving towards me. And I got a mile from the highway and the snow hit. And I was on an open creek system at that point. And it literally started snowing so hard, you know, no wind, just snow, straight down, huge flakes, snowing so hard I could not see 50 feet in any direction. But luckily, I mean, it hadn't covered up my trail yet, and I got through that open creek just by looking in front and following the trail, and I got to where my trail went through the bush, and then it wasn't so bad, but it was only, you know, half mile from there to the highway. I got to the highway, and there was already 8 inches of snow sitting on the ground in 10 minutes. And anyways, got in the vehicle, headed home. That there snowstorm in 12 hours dropped about 26 inches, 27 inches of snow on my trail. Good enough that I couldn't snowmobile in. I had to snowshoe the trail in the next time. But just, you know, an amazing 82-degree temperature change in 8 hours is just, you know, I've never seen nothing like it before. But, you know, I guess guys out west in the you know, mountain stuff, you know, that must be what a Chinook is like. You just get the, you know, severe cold to, you know, to really, really plus temperatures in no time at all. Where in Ontario we never see Chinooks. It's not something that happens. But just wanted to share that with you. But, you know, just a couple of things to watch if you're, you know, wet foot wintertime. Stop and build a fire as soon as you feel, you know, like that time walking out there when it was 68 below. I could have stopped and built a fire, you know, but then again, you know, pressure of somebody waiting for you. You don't want them to worry. You know, it was, I think my last, a couple times, story times ago, talking about the long walks. You know, this was before I'd convinced my wife that, and actually this is one of the reasons that she didn't worry about me after, whenever I was late, you know, because I always told her, remember, 24 hours, if I'm not back in 24 hours after I'm supposed to be back, then you can start worrying. Because she realized at that point that I was smart enough not to push my luck, and if something happened, I would just, you know, be at the cabin and safe until, and then make my way out. But, you know, that, their time too, I could have stopped and built a fire. You know, I could feel my feet weren't in any kind of danger of freezing, so it wasn't a big deal. But just crazy weather. You know, we don't see much of that anymore. 68 below is not something that down here, it's I don't know that we'll see with, if there is global warming, whatever it is, if we'll ever see too much of that down here again. But, you know, White River is just well known as the, you know, the coldest spot in Canada. And it's funny, you know, being right, you know, only an hour from Lake Superior, you'd think there'd be some kind of warming factor there, but it's in a little hollow, big hills all around it, and the you know, I can remember going to work and stuff, and I lived up on the top of the hill at the end of the subdivision, and by the time you got downtown, and you're not talking a big hill, you're talking maybe a 100-foot elevation difference, but it would be 8 degrees colder in that 100 feet than it was up at my house. It was goofy. But anyways, that's enough babbling. I'll catch you guys later. Until next time.